All right, good morning everyone. I've just got it ticking over to 9 o'clock on my watch, so I think we'll get going. So yes, good morning Morena. My name is Dr. Lee Beattie. I'm the Independent Hearing Commissioner appointed by the Council to consider this application. And I'm sitting here in an office here in the Council building, and we have the Council offices in another room inside the same building, but we'll go through introductions in a moment. So we're here to consider the application by J. Harris, A. Farrier and V. Simons for the construction of a two-storey residential unit, a residential flat with attached double garage at 7 Devon Street, Arrowtown, as set out in the agenda. I would normally go through some health and safety things, but clearly we're all in our own spaces, so we'll just be cognizant of those sort of things. I'd just like to say if anyone's cat or dog comes to pass through the screen, that's all good. And if I was in my house, that would probably be happening too. So don't be worried about that, or if we have any kids or anything in the background, it's just great. So unfortunately, we are live streaming. We are on Zoom and we are live streaming, and this has been recorded. Just a reflection of the times we're in. So unfortunately, that's where we're at. I think we'd all prefer to be in person, but unfortunately, it is what it is. So we'll just have to move on with what we've got. In terms of the process, for the people who have not been involved in this process, I'll just quickly outline this process for you. And I'd also like to say it's a very small hearing, it's very discreet, so we'll try and keep this as informal as we possibly can, but there still does need to be a bit of formality, but we'll try and keep it formal as we go. The process is basically we'll have the applicant will outline their case, and Ms. Barnett will provide for legal submissions, which thank you, I've just received. Thank you very much. She will go through that. Then we will move through the witnesses. Now, all the evidence is being read in advance, and only myself can ask questions. There's no cross-examination from any of the parties. After we've gone through, we've had legal submissions, I've asked questions of the applicant's witnesses. We'll reach an important point in the case where the applicant will say that's their case. Then we'll move over to the submitters when you can outline your concerns. I think we've got Ms. Carter there who's giving us, has got evidence as well. Her evidence has been read as well. I'll go through and ask her questions. If you hear anything going through the process that you would like to raise, just hold off, as I say, until it's your turn, and then you can bring it to my attention. We'll go through it. Then what we'll have, after we've gone through the submitters, same thing, only myself can ask questions. Then we'll be at the point of right of reply, and we'll see where we land. Given the nature of this, we might be able to go straight into this, or what we tend to do for hearings, but again, that's a scale thing, we tend to usually give a 5 working day period for the applicant to go away and do a right of reply. And in that space, they can't introduce any new evidence, they can only respond to the issues raised through the submissions before us. So that's the quick process, and as I say, we'll try to keep it as informal as possible as we go along. In terms of the site visit, I did the site visit yesterday afternoon, went for a good walk around the district, and just as a bit of background, I've been working in the district for nearly 5 years now, so I have a good understanding of the district. I am Auckland based, and my only role in the district is as a commissioner. But I did a good walk around the space, around Arrowtown, know it quite well, and had a good walk around the surrounds and such like to go with it as well. So that was really, really helpful. What I'd like to do now is I'd like everyone to introduce themselves, even though we're on Zoom and we all can't see each other. It's just really good so everyone knows who's online and such like. And so when you're not, because we are on Zoom, when you're not talking, please make sure you're on mute. It's really helpful if you can just make sure to do that. So I might start with the council, with Ms. Beck. You're there. Could you introduce yourself and the other council officers with you?
Hi, I'm Ms. Beck here, and I'm a planner, consultant planner on behalf of QODC.
Thank you.
Yep. And Andrew Woodford here, I'm a senior planner, just assisting Fern today.
Thank you, thanks very much. Good to see you again. Ms. Barnett, well, I don't think we've met before, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Commissioner. I'm Lauren Barnett, and I'm here with Alex Dunn.
Yeah, Alex Dunn. I'm a planning consultant with Southern Planning Group.
Yes, I think
and we're here on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, thank you. And do we have is your client with us? Are they online as well?
Anna Farrier is here with Murray, but they're at a separate location.
No, that's all good. Hello, madam. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Morning.
Murray Bennett.
Good.
And I'm Anna, one of the applicants.
Good, lovely to meet you. Any other part of your team, Ms. Barnett, there? Any other the applicant there?
No.
No, that's all, Commissioner.
Okay. And for the submitters?
Hi, I'm Jenny Carter. I'm a planner for the submitter, and I've got Justin Parks with me here.
Good to see you again. Thank you, and thank you, madam, for coming along. And I also should say I'm ably assisted by the lovely Ms. Anderson, Trish Anderson, who's our hearing advisor, and so all correspondence
Good morning, all.
go through Trish.
Yeah, I'll be
Okay.
helping anyone out today.
And I think you're in another space, Trish.
Pardon me?
You're not with Andrew and Fern. You're in another space as well.
No, I'm just at my desk.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the nature of the times. Okay.
I'm sorry,
So-
Commissioner. Sorry, we didn't introduce Richard Parks, who's
Oh, sorry.
on a separate
Yes,
screen.
you there, Mr. Parks?
Hello, Commissioner. Yeah, no, my name is Richard Parks. I'm also representing the Parks family in this matter.
So, and are you in Christchurch, are you?
Yes, as a family member, I'm assisting the family.
Sure, no problems. Great to have you, sir. Thank you. So my apologies for not going through. So have we covered everyone? Has everyone introduced themselves? Okay. Good, thank you. Before I go any further, is there any procedural matters anyone would like to bring to my attention before we start the formal hearing? Okay.
Yes, Commissioner, I have one.
Sure.
I have written a submission on behalf of the Parks family, which was emailed through early this morning.
Yes, I have that. And my understanding is you'd like to read that out when we come to submissions. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, please. That would be great. As a late change, because I don't know if it necessarily adds anything, and I'd rather leave a consultant architect out of it. I just would like to delete one of the paragraphs.
Sure. Shall we come to that when it's your turn to speak? Shall we take it out there?
Yep, that's completely
Oh,
fine.
actually, no, we'll do it so Ms. Barnett knows what you'd like to take out. What would you like to take out, sir?
It's on page 3,
Yes?
and the paragraphs is the second last paragraph, and it starts with prior to this meeting.
Oh, yeah, got it?
It's that paragraph there, which is about 10 or so lines long. If I could have that deleted from the record.
Certainly. I'm just striking it out now, so it's gone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else anyone else would like to raise? Okay, excellent, thank you. Ms. Barnett, I'm really in your hands. As you know, all the evidence has been read, and I've got a whole lot of questions. Obviously, I assume you would like to read the submissions that you've just been given to us. I've got a copy here. Thank you for that. And then, would you like to do some quick summaries of your evidence and then straight into questions? How would you like to play this?
Well, I guess how about I read my submissions since they were only circulated this morning, and then the other evidence we had as it's read, I think Alex would like to just summarise his,
Yes.
and then if you have, and potentially Murray, and then it's just really if you have any questions following that.
Sure. In terms of the order, would it be the architect, the applicant, then the architect, then the planner? Is that your plan of attack?
We were thinking planner first, then architect.
Sure, no problems. All right, Ms. Barnett, over to you.
Okay, great. So I'll just get into it. These submissions are made on behalf of the applicants in support of the application for resource consent to construct a residential dwelling at 7 Devon Street, Arrowtown. It is submitted that consent for the application should be granted subject to appropriate conditions for the reasons set out below and on the basis of the application filed on 27th of July 2021, as well as the evidence of the applicants and the Section 42A report of Ms. Beck for the Queenstown Lakes District Council. On the 15th of October 2021, the Council issued a decision in accordance with Sections 95A to 95E of the Resource Management Act, which determined that the application would be processed on a limited notified basis to the registered owners of the adjoining property 9 Devon Street. No other party was notified of the application. By document dated 17 November 2021, the owners of 9 Devon Street lodged a submission objecting to the application and seeking that it be declined. Ms. Beck for the council has prepared a report in accordance with section 42A of the RMA and has recommended that consent be approved. Statements of evidence on behalf of the applicant have been prepared and pre-circulated to all parties from Messrs. Dunn, Bennett and the applicants. These submissions will set out the legal consideration framework for consideration in this instance, address the submitter's objections and why it is submitted that these objections are flawed, and establish with the support of the evidence provided by the experts and applicant in support of the application why the recommendation of Ms. Beck's should be adopted and the application should be granted. Status of the application. All parties are in agreement as to the consents required by the application and that overall the application should be considered a restricted discretionary activity. It is also correctly identified in the evidence of Mr. Dunn and the section 42A report that consent is only required under the council's proposed district plan, as the relevant rules are now beyond appeal and the operative district plan rules are deemed to be inoperative. As such, the subject site is zoned medium density residential. Significantly, the zone's purpose is stated as the medium density residential zone has the purpose of providing for residential development at greater density than the lower density residential zone. In conjunction with the high density residential zone and the lower density suburban residential zone, this zone will play a key role in minimising urban sprawl and increasing housing supply. The zone is situated in locations within Queenstown, Frankton, Arrowtown and Wanaka that are identified urban growth boundaries. The medium density residential zone provides for an increased density of housing in locations that are supported by adequate existing or planned infrastructure. The zone will undergo changes to existing densities and built form characteristics over time to provide for the social, cultural and environmental well-being of the district's community. Building height will generally be of 2 stories. It is important to keep the zone's purpose at the forefront when considering the application. It is acknowledged that this is new zoning for the area, and that any new development needs to be appropriate. However, the council has identified this area as specifically capable of absorbing higher density development, and this is supported and even encouraged by the wording of the zone's purpose. The area is currently undergoing transformation and is likely to have quite a different character in the foreseeable future. Sections 104 and 104C provide the relevant considerations for determination of a restricted discretionary activity. I don't think it's necessary to read these sections out. We're all pretty familiar with them.
I think we all know those ones.
Yeah, I'll skip over those.
So up to 15?
Yeah. So these considerations are addressed below. Effects on environment. The applicant has provided substantial third-party expert reports on planning and architectural design. These reports support approval of the application. Ms. Beck and the council engineer have also assessed the application and their reports support approval of the application. Mr. Dunn has reviewed the draft conditions of consent recommended by Ms. Beck and agrees that they will adequately and appropriately mitigate the adverse effects. The applicant also at this stage wishes to confirm that they agree to the additional consent sought by the submitters in their latest evidence, and this is discussed further below. Overall, Mr. Dunn and Ms. Beck concur that the effects of the application on the environment will be no more than minor. In response to the evidence of Ms. Carter on behalf of the objectors, the applicants missed to make a couple of notes. Firstly, as I said, they're agreeable to the conditions of consent sought by the objectors at paragraph 5.6 of Ms. Carter's evidence, namely that the colours and materials on the plans provided at pages 40 and 41 of Mr. Dunn's evidence be imposed as a condition, and that the landscape vegetation is to be provided along the southern boundary. The proposed cladding finishes along the southeastern boundary perhaps weren't entirely clear from the plans lodged with the application. However, it has since been clarified that the proposal is for 2 different materials and 2 different colours along this portion of the facade, and that it will not be a monochrome wall. And just lastly, RM consultants have confirmed that the shadow diagrams that were included in the evidence were prepared using the medium density rules from the proposed district plan, governing bulk and location, including the setback and recession planes. The specific rules are identified in that footnote. Therefore, this is an accurate description of what may be built on the site. Permitted baseline and receiving environment. The permitted baseline and receiving environment are well described in the reports of Ms. Beck and Mr. Dunn. Further to these descriptions, the following is submitted: that construction of the garage was legalised by resource consent RM 000352. As is detailed in the application, when the garage was constructed, it was unknowingly placed 1 metre into the road boundary. The total area of that consented garage was 39.68 square metres with a height of 3.47 metres. And the portion of the garage within the road boundary is a total area of 6 square metres. It is acknowledged that the 6 square metre portion of the garage does not comply with that resource consent. However, the remaining 33.68 square metres of the garage does comply with the consent and is properly considered as part of the receiving environment. Through application of the zone purpose and the matters for discretion for rules 8.5.6.1 and 8.5.6.3, the Aratang design guidelines become necessary for consideration. The rules specify that the application be assessed for consistency with Aratang's character as described in the Aratang design guidelines 2016, and the zone purpose provides that consideration will need to be given to the town's special character and the design criteria identified by the Aratang design guidelines 2016. Firstly, it is noted that neither of these assessments require or seek total compliance with the guidelines. To say otherwise would be illogical. By its nature, a guideline can only be a guidance document and are not a fixed set of mandatory criteria. The guidelines confirm this in the purpose section where it states that they have been developed to provide assistance to the community, landowners, developers, designers, planners, council and decision makers, and they include recommendations for new Aratang, showing ways to achieve cohesiveness through the town. In terms of objectives and policies, again, both Mr. Dunn and Ms. Beck are in alignment in relation to these relevant objectives and policies to be considered, and the conclusions from a comparison of the applicant's application against these objectives and policies. It is submitted on the basis of the evidence of Mr. Dunn and Ms. Beck that the proposal is consistent with these objectives and policies. Part 2 of the RMA, it is submitted that the applicant accords with Part 2 of the RMA. It represents an efficient use of resources as it will allow for high quality, intensified residential living whilst not adversely affecting the character of the existing environment. The application does not involve any relevant matters of national importance. In terms of precedence, the evidence of Ms. Carter on behalf of the objectors stresses that precedence is the concern and cites this is the reason the application should be refused. Firstly, it is submitted that precedence effect is not a proper consideration in this instance, as the application is for a restricted discretionary consent and precedent effect is not an element that the council has retained discretion over. I've cited a couple of cases there in that footnote, number 10. I haven't provided copies of those, Commissioner, but I'm happy to send those through if it would be beneficial.
It's all good. Something I'll explore with Ms. Carter, the issue of precedent, but I've taken the view of a recent case, I think, I can't remember which one it was, but I could have where Auckland Council got criticised for raising the issue, and the court got quite frustrated with Auckland Council for talking about the issue of precedent when everything was a case-by-case response. So I take your argument here.
Okay, yeah, I was just leading into the case-by-case argument. So I'll just take that as read.
Yes, please.
Okay, and I'll move on to my conclusion. In conclusion, as can be seen in the detailed brief of evidence from Mr. Bennett and the statement from the applicants, great thought and care has gone into developing the design of the dwelling to ensure that it both is appropriate for the Arrowtown setting while also future-proofing it for the applicant's family. The applicants genuinely believe that the application is the best outcome for the site and the adjoining neighbours. It is submitted that the application is appropriate in terms of the relevant matters under section 104 of the RMA. In particular, the application achieves the purpose of the medium density residential zone, has more than minor effects on the environment, no more than minor effects on the environment in terms of shading, public views, external appearance and dominance of the built form, character of the area and traffic safety. Meets the majority of the design principles within the Arrowtown design guidelines and the overall intent of those guidelines. It is consistent with the objectives and policies, and it promotes the overall purpose and principles of the RMA as set out in part 2. Accordingly, based on these submissions and the evidence in support of the application and Ms. Beck's recommendation, a decision to grant is considered appropriate. Mr. Dunn and Bennett are now available to present their evidence. And Ms. Farrier is also in attendance, as we said, to answer any questions if you consider that necessary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Liz. I've just got a few questions for you, if that's okay.
Of course.
And I'll also signal this to the planners as well. It seems to me that we're in this, and again, I'd like all three planners, and so sort of putting you on notice that I'll ask you this question. It seems to me we're in this sort of strange scenario. I'd like your point of view on this. Is it seems to me that the guidelines only apply if you require a resource consent. And if you're a permanent activity, you can have you just got a whole set of bulk and massing controls which allow you to achieve a different type of outcome than what the design guidelines are saying. And it seems to me, and maybe something I can explore with Ms. Beck and such like a bit further from the council point of view, how this sort of evolved, because it does seem to be a bit strange to me that we've got the scenario where we've got these guidelines seeking to achieve one outcome, yet we've got a permanent activity status achieving a different type of outcome. Am I reading that from a legal point of view correctly, Ms. Farrier?
From a legal point of view, yes, that's 100% how the plan works. And the reason for that, how that came about, I can't speak to, but there is a conflict there, definitely.
Okay, cool. So just putting a note, I'd like Ms. Colas and Ms. Dunn and Ms. Beck's views on this as well. Next question. In terms of the weight that these guidelines have, are these 101B matters, because they're referred to in the policy framework, or are they just 104.1C matters? What do you think they are?
I missed that, sorry, Commissioner.
So
104C matters or 101?
Yeah, so are they a policy matter in 104.1B matters? So are they something to a policy matter, or are they a 104.1C matter, something you have to regard to? Where would you see them sitting in that sort of hierarchy, effects, policy, and other matters? Where would you see them sitting?
I think 101, I think C, Commissioner, something to have regard to.
So they, even though they're sort of referred to in the policy framework, you don't see them as, they're just more of as your submissions sort of alluding to, they're more just a guideline and something to have regard to for the consenting process.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just wanted your views on that. No, thank you very much. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to pass on to Alex, Mr. Dunn now?
Dunn, please. Yes, please. Would you like to do a summary and then straight into questions, or what would you like to do?
Yes, summary and then into questions, Commissioner.
Thank you.
My name is Alex Dunn. I'm a resource management planning consultant with Southern Planning Group. I hold a Bachelor of Environmental Management and Planning from Lincoln University and have 6.5 years in the resource management field. I understand my primary evidence has been circulated and taken as read, so here I'm just going to summarise the key points from that evidence. I confirm I have read the Code of Conduct for Expert Witnesses contained in the Environment Court of New Zealand Practice Note 2014 and have complied with it, preparing my evidence. The proposal is for the establishment of a residential unit and attached garage. The existing residential unit and garage will be removed. The proposal requires a number of resource consents under the proposed district plan. I agree with Ms. Carter and Ms. Beck that the application requires resource consent to breach a 4.5 metre road setback as it relates to the proposed garage, as all other buildings are required to be 3 metres from the road setback. For clarity, I also agree that consent is required to breach the internal boundary setback. At section 5.1 of my evidence, I state that 5 Devon Street were notified. This should have stated 9 Devon Street, the submitter's site. I consider the permitted baseline and existing environment is of relevance. While the existing garage is not in its lawful location, the applicant would be able to move this garage to comply with the underlying resource consent. It is my opinion that the consent has been given effect to, and the exact location of the current garage is a compliance issue. I agree with Ms. Carter that the submitter's site does have development potential. However, a restricted discretionary activity consent would be required at a minimum to develop this site. To mitigate potential effects of the wall adjacent to the submitter's property, 2 different colours and materials are proposed to be utilised alongside that facade. This will ensure that the wall does not read as one blank facade. The applicant is not relying on vegetation that is located on the submitter's site for mitigation purposes. The applicant is willing to establish additional vegetation along the southeastern boundary. The location of the garage is the most practical location on the site for a garage. For a garage on the site to be located at least 4.5 metres from the road, earthworks would be required to fill in land near where the rock reef is located. These earthworks would not be harmonious with the existing topography or form of the site. I do not agree with Ms. Carter's opinion that the recession plane breach is significant. While the recession plane is breached by a maximum height of 1.6 metres at the apex of the southern portion of the building, the majority of the recession plane is breached by no more than 70 centimetres. In total, the area of recession plane breach adjacent to the submitter's property is 36 metres squared. I am of the opinion that the proposal is consistent with the objectives and policies of the proposed district plan. While the proposal is not entirely consistent with the outcomes sought by the Arrowtown Design Guidelines, the proposal is generally consistent with these guidelines. These provisions have been taken into consideration and assessed as part of this resource consent proposal. Overall, I consider the proposal promotes sustainable management of the land resource and therefore achieves the purpose of the RMA. The proposal involves developing the site in line with the provisions of the medium density zone. I consider the effects of the development can be suitably avoided, remedied, or mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy to take some questions from myself?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just picking up that question, as I said, I've just highlighted the last all 3 of the planners present. Do you obviously, I assume you were nodding when I asked that question. There seems to be, I had loathe to use the word anomaly, but there does seem to be a bit of a potential conflict, shall we say, between the design guidelines and the medium density zone. Do you know how that came about or anything like that? Have you been involved in why that exists?
I wouldn't be confident commenting on that. To be honest, I'd have to go back and review council's
if you don't have
with regard to the PDP.
Involved, don't worry.
I was not involved with that. No.
No, don't. That's all good. Don't go there. So, but in your view, there is that scenario where that I've highlighted is correct, that you could have this permitted building scenario in terms of bulk. It gives a bulk and mass, which is quite a different sort of outcome than what's sought by the design guides.
Yes, it is quite odd that, on one hand, we have the medium density residential zone. Built form is essentially controlled by your setbacks, your height, bulk and location standards. As soon as you trigger one of these standards, then consideration needs to be given to the Arrowtown design guidelines. There's no permitted standard to comply or undertake an assessment against these guidelines with any building in the medium density zone, compared with the Arrowtown Historic Management Zone, where all buildings require resource consent, and that automatically triggers the requirement to undertake an assessment under those guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Just slowly moving through your evidence, and thank you very much for this. Just if I can go to 417B, C, 417C. You say it's best, and you've got the applicant's commitment to ensure the boundary trees are retained as best as reasonably practical. What does that practical mean?
Yes, so in the area where the proposed garage is, it is acknowledged that some vegetation will need to be removed. So on the site at the moment, there's quite scrubby sort of vegetation alongside that boundary. The applicant's intention is to retain the majority of that vegetation as best as practical. However, I do acknowledge that some will need to be removed to accommodate the new proposed garage. So that's essentially what I'm meaning by that point.
So just moving forward with that, and just for the benefit of the submitters, the fact we might be talking about conditions or anything like that means absolutely nothing. It's just normal practice that we just sort of work our way through the process. But if we picked up what Ms. Carter's saying, and I think that's highlighted in Ms. Barnett's legal submissions about if there was a condition imposed, and I think that's 5.6 of Ms. Carter's evidence about the landscaping, is that something that could potentially be done if we got to that point, that could be done in conjunction with the parties to see if we can come up with some agreed landscaping? Would that be the best way forward in your view?
My view is, our view is, we don't see any problem with that.
Okay, and I just want to stress for the submitters that doesn't mean we come to any view. I haven't come to any view. It's just working our way through the process as we go. Okay, thank you. Sort of through your evidence, there's this flavour about you talk a lot about a positive relationship with the street and the design of the building. I'd be interested with you to expand your thinking behind that. It's something I'll pick up with the architectural designer as well. I mean, generally as a general relationship, you probably have more fenestration facing onto the street to create that relationship, and you probably have, and something as I say, I'll pick up with the designer as we go along, maybe a different room configuration to provide a better relationship to the street. I'm just interested in your thinking about that, because we've got, I think it's around about 45 to 45% of the road frontage is the garage, isn't it?
Yes, it's just under 50%. Yes,
yeah, just under 50, that's right, which you've got 440. And then so you've got that, you've got the wall, and then you've got the building. And I'm interested in your reading that as a totality, because you talk a lot about the garage, but then when you read the garage, you're reading the garage with the wall as a package with the building behind. And we only have one window at the top floor level. I'm interested in how your view on how that creates that positive relationship. As I say, as a general principle, you would tend to have more fenestration or more windows in that elevation.
Yeah, so I think it's a positive relationship with regard to the challenges of the site. So just behind the existing garage is that 1 to 1.5 metre rock reef where the topography of the site drops. So that presents a limited area of space toward the front of the site where any building could be established. So through the design phase, when we were looking at how it could actually work, and Mr. Bennett can speak further to this, but when you're looking at the actual room area in the front portion of the building, there's a really limited amount of room where any usable or communal space could be established. So that's why the kitchen and dining area is to the north of the building, away from the street. So that presents a challenge of how to actually articulate the building along the road boundary to give it a positive street presence. So that's why the existing laurel hedge will be retained. There will be a clearly dimensioned path into the building. So the front door is also glass, as is the side panel beside it with the window above it. There will be a large specimen tree also in the front lawn. So even though there isn't a large number of windows along the front portion of the site, given the topography of the site and the challenge it presents, it is my opinion that the building does have a successful relationship with the street, especially compared to the existing building that is currently on site, which I would consider has almost no relationship with the street. Essentially, the existing building is below the rock reef that is on site and is at quite a low elevation compared to the street. So in my opinion, the new building does have a way more positive relationship with the street.
Okay, thank you. Now, I forgot to say thank you very much to the applicant for the lovely little model I do have here in the office with me here. It's here, plus the slates and ideas of materiality as well. Okay, I don't know if I didn't get it, but is there actually a landscaping plan you're proposing apart from these nice renders here that show some landscaping? Is there a landscaping plan that you were proposing? Because I've got these, which are these nice renders.
Yes, there should be one in there. Mr. Bennett drew it up, essentially showed the existing vegetation alongside the boundary and the location of the new specimen tree, as well as the path.
Was that attached to his evidence?
Should have been in the application.
Right, sorry, okay, just wondering where it is. Okay, cool, thank you. Because I suppose that's my next question is, how long do you think, I suppose it comes back to the type of species and size of planting really, doesn't it?
It does, and that's something we've considered, and we'd be willing for a condition that, you know, detail has more requirements about the landscaping, including species and grade of species at planting. At the moment, the landscape plan is rather rudimentary, fairly common for residential developments. However, if it would appease the submitters or, you know, provide more clarity, we would be willing to look at a more detailed landscape condition that sets out specific requirements, including the grades and species of vegetation.
Thank you. Just working my way through, because you're answering the questions as I've got them, which is thank you. Just working my way through your evidence now. And I should just also say thank you for both your client and the submitters for the opportunity to go on your properties you say. I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. So I'm going through it. Just interested at 5.3, when you enter response to the submitters, you say it's nearly almost impossible to develop the site without being consistent with the guidelines. I suppose you probably could, it's just a question of the scale of the building you're doing, isn't it? Or do you think you're, by that statement there at 5.3, you're thinking that basically it's near impossible to build something on this site that would meet those guidelines, the Arrowtown?
Not near on impossible, but I think looking at the design summary development checklist, which is contained at section 5.9 of the Arrowtown design guidelines, which has 15 criterion about development on a site. In my opinion, to develop, redevelop or develop a site, there's always bound to be at least one or two inconsistencies with the guidelines. I'm not saying it's impossible to be entirely consistent with them. However, given the topography of the site, I think it is a challenge.
You'd always end up with some sort of breach, if you like, for these words, is what you're saying.
Yeah, correct, exactly, yes.
No, thank you. That's all good. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.
Right. Mr. Bennett, are you there? You're in a different space, I take it.
We're out at Arrowtown and
How are you, sir?
thank you.
Would you like to do a summary, same as Mr. Dunn, or would you just like me to go into questions?
I'll just do a wee summary. That's all right.
All
My
good.
name is Murray Bennett. I'm an architectural designer and sole director of Murray Bennett Design and self-employed for 20 years. My qualifications include New Zealand Certificate in Drafting, 1982, New Zealand Certificate in Building, 1984. I'm a professional member of Architectural Designers New Zealand and a Design 3 license holder with Ministry of Innovation, Business and Employment. I have 40 years experience as a qualified architectural designer, and of those 30 years within the Wakatipu. I'm a previous recipient of regional and national design awards. I have been employed by Anna and Jeff for the design, documentation and construction of their new house at 7 Devon Street. The design has been undertaken using the district scheme medium density rules and strong recognition of the Arrowtown Design Guidelines 2016. Other design options have been considered, and it was the one that's tabled has been chosen because I feel the option matches the objectives of the governing design rules and is an excellent outcome for the owners, neighbours, environment, and for Arrowtown. I'm open to address questions regarding the design, and my submission dated 4th of February is also previously tabled.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Bennett. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do have some interesting questions, and I saw your thinking behind where the garage went. So I see you've tested different design solutions for the garage. It's sort of interesting, again, picking up which I raised with Mr. Dunn, just picking up that whole issue about the relationship and using fenestration onto the street. And I'm interested in your thoughts because at ground, and I totally take the point about the fall. It was really, really quite prominent when you went on site. Interesting you're thinking about, because you've got the media room facing onto the street, which has a blank wall. And then at first floor level above it, directly above it, you have the bedroom, which doesn't have any windows facing onto the street. It has the window obviously facing the walls to catch the sun. I totally get that. But was there any thinking, especially at the first floor level, of putting any windows in there to try and create a better relationship with the street? And the same, because you've got in the sitting space, totally get that, if that's the only window. But was there any thought about putting some more windows in the bedroom to provide that sort of a surveillance of the street type thing?
Yes, definitely. I had at one stage narrow windows either side of the bed.
Yeah.
But because the road across the road is slightly elevated, privacy was going to be a major issue from across the road, Centennial Avenue, sort of like 20, 30 metres away. And if I'd put windows there, they were probably going to have blinds or shutters on them full time. So was it better to have arbitrary windows or no windows at all? And I chose the no windows for substantial privacy for the owners.
Okay. Because, I take your point. What we've found in my other life, I've just done a lot of work on Hobsonville, and I've discovered that things that are too close to the road, if they're floor to ceiling, people just have blinds down 24/7 for privacy reasons. So yes. I take your point. And I just want to understand your rationale about why you didn't do that, but that sort of explains that. And I suppose it's the same with the media room, given its nature of it. And I suppose, there's other question. Was there thought about where the media room is now? That could have been the study, and then relocating flipping those rooms around. You know what I'm trying to say? To create some different type of room in that front space.
Yes, I gave consideration about that. The concept of upstairs at the upper level bedroom one sitting is Anna and Jeff. They work from home. They got teenagers. I was trying to isolate them to give their part of the house privacy rather than sort of having teenagers around. The way I see it is half of upstairs, there's no one else needs to go into there because it's all just Anna and Jeff's private area. It's a private sitting room. Is actually, they may come out with a laptop and work from home, and might just have see a quiet space, quiet area. And it was like, because there's a whole lot of pieces of that design jigsaw, where to actually put them to maximize the best result. I take on board what you're saying regarding windows. As a trade-off, how I approached it is the house portion, forget the garage at this stage, the house portion can be built 3 meters away from the road boundary.
Yes.
I nominated that. I decided to push that back, and I'm just pulling up a plan. One at A110, you can see I looked at various options where to locate that. The reason why I chose the option proposed site for that house, and I respect the interplay of the windows with the street, was to allow greater landscaping in that front 3 meters, which I turned into front 4.8 is available for landscaping. So basically I pushed the house further back from the street. As a trade-off, it's a big balancing act. And that was my approach on that.
No, I totally understand the design process is such an iterative process. That's why it's really interesting to see, and it's really helpful for you to provide that plan 110 to show your design thinking, how you've gone through that process to test the sort of test ideas. Okay, so then following your logic through there, then it does come quite critical, and it's also shown on the nice little model here, is that the vegetation, the landscape that does take place in that space is quite critical to your view as well then.
100% agree. That front yard, that 4.8 setback of the house, Arrowtown is all about trees and design and history. And personally, I feel 3 meters doesn't give you a great scope to put a feature tree and a laurel hedge and a house, because the feature tree may have a shadow of 3 meters anyhow. So it sort of crowds the whole front yard. And I see that front yard, that front house setback is high value. That increased amount from 3 to 4.8 as per sheet 110. And with that in mind, by pushing the house back, I was trying to balance the garage being forward on the site. Personally, I would have rather, when I'm addressing the garage being on the front boundary or near the front boundary, is yes, that is, I would rather see a garage on the front boundary than a long driveway, which is going to attract messy cars. In the Waka Tip, the cars are messy, in my opinion. There's not enough car parking anywhere and everywhere. I would rather see cars in a garage than cars and boats parked on streets and everything like that. And the Arrowtown design rules are more focused for single garages and make it difficult for double garages to comply. But excluding the compliance thing, I just felt the picture from the street, a highly landscaped street setback, and a neutral earthy tone garage, which is what we've got non-complying, is the best option. Because I even looked at garages down the rear of the site, but I didn't want to see what I call supermarket car park driveways down the side of the site.
Thank you. No, I tell you, and I think it's something that we're all going to face as more cars on the streets and as we move forward from the 18th. I think it was the 18th that kicked in. Just in terms of the height to boundary or the recession plane infringements, especially on the submitter's property, was it possible from a design point of view to slope that off to make that comply, given it's the wardrobe and the ensuite, or is that because of where you've got is that the shower prevents that head height? Is that the rationale?
The Arrowtown design guidelines encourage gable types of roofs. yes, we could have hit it back and it would have been more compliant and probably would be in compliant, but that's not what the vision and objectives I felt the guidelines were trying to portray. Historical Arrowtown is gables of various proportions. Then we looked at symmetrical gables and asymmetrical gables. And again, symmetrical is the Arrowtown guideline objective, is reading the rules, whereas an asymmetrical gable can be seen as quite a modern approach. And I chose the symmetrical to be more in line with the guidelines of historic Arrowtown. So yes, I needed that space up top, without a doubt. And yes, gable projects the height envelope at this stage. This is about iteration number 3. I've reduced the stud height to reduce that intrusion. I've reduced the roof pitch. I've reduced the floor level. I've just squeezed it right down from option 1. And visually from the street, I felt the form, excluding the neighbours with this comment, the visual from the street is the gables, which is what I'm sure what the Arrowtown guidelines wish. Okay, bringing the neighbours side of it is the gable looking at it is in line with the objectives of the rules, but yes, it creates an element of shading, which Aurum Survey have done shading diagrams for, and there is a height intrusion. With the main living room wing, the intrusion's there. I looked at various options for that. I went back to the surveyors twice to confirm the design is for a flat site rather than a sloping site, because that's a different set of rules. A flat site is deemed 6 degrees and less. We sit at about 5.8 degrees, but which is legally, technically, a flat site, and we've done it for a flat site. But it's right on the cusp of going to a blanket 7 metres within the yards. But we've adhered to the rules we've got to, and we've encroached it. Then on sheet 110, I looked at the distance I push the living room wing away from the boundary, from the common boundary. And I looked at the asymmetric design of that, and I could have it closer with an asymmetric design, but I felt that wasn't in keeping with the objectives of the guidelines. So, because I can go by the district scheme rules, I could go 1.5 off the boundary. I chose to go 2.9, and I believe that living room wing, when viewed from the neighbours, is the impacts are no greater than minor, and it doesn't block out any additional view. By pushing it further away and a couple of things like that, I've actually got a ridge height through there of approximately 6.2 above the existing ground level. District scheme allows 7 metres. So I was respecting the neighbour's view to Brow Peak and the sunlight that comes over the top of the ridge. That 800 lower than the maximum is, I think, a benefit to the neighbours. And so the bit that is non-compliant, it was a trade-off, basically. And I felt the trade-off was, in this instance, was the better option for the neighbours.
Okay. I totally understand everything you're saying, and I think it's very helpful for you to explain that your thinking and rationale behind that. Okay, I'll just go back into your evidence in chief and just make sure I haven't missed anything, because I was just flipping off the plans which are attached to the 42A report. So just picking up that privacy issue, just so I understand you correctly, that's from the park, isn't it? Across the street. and because that's elevated, because the street, as the site goes up, like you've got the street, it elevates with the pitch, and then you've got the other street and the other park over there, haven't you, from memory?
Yes,
That's
yes, yes.
Yeah. Coming down from the park. Okay.
Also, with the common boundary, I chose not to open much of the wall there regarding windows, because I respect the privacy that parks don't want to look into our rooms, and my clients don't want to look into their open yard. So we kept windows to a minimum. That was talked about quite a lot about the privacy. I talked a lot about with my client that we didn't want to look at each other, and it's an element of respecting their privacy, respecting my client's privacy as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Bennett. Thank you very much. No further questions for me. It's been very helpful. Thank you for me understanding.
Thank you.
Ms. Farrier, would you like to talk to your evidence that you're given?
I haven't got anything further to add, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
No, it's all good. I totally understand, and I understand, you know, it seems to me that through family relations that things have moved on, and you and your family tend to move into the space and use it now.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, so we obviously had the long association with our town, and want to make it so that we can have, you know, for the future generations to be able to use and us to enjoy it.
Your sisters use the place, if you like, to be using words, now it's your turn.
That's right. Yeah,
okay,
that's exactly right. Yes.
Okay, it's all good. All good. Totally understand that sort of stuff. So, may I ask, where are you based now? Are you in Dunedin?
No, we live in Wellington.
Oh, Wellington.
Yes, yeah, we've lived there for many years.
A bit of trouble there at the moment, isn't there? But let's move on.
Yes, I've been watching it closely this morning. I'm heading back this afternoon, and to hoping everyone's keep it away from it. I don't think it's very nice there this morning.
Yeah, let's move on from that. Okay, thank you very much. So, nothing more you want to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Farrier. Ms. Barnett, is there anything else you'd like to bring to my attention before we move on and you present your case, if you like? You there? You're on mute? How many times do we say that? Ms. Barnett, you there?
Sorry, Commissioner, yes, I was on mute.
It's all good.
It never gets easier.
No.
No, that is our case, Commissioner.
Okay.
We don't have anything further to add.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, and very appreciate the questions from your witnesses and your submissions. Thank you very much. Jenny, Ms. Carter, do you want to have a break before we go to you, or are you happy to, because we sort of usually have breaks, as you know, usually around 11 and 1. I don't know if we'll get to 1, but you never know. Would you like a break now, or would you like to box on?
Yes, please. We'd appreciate a break.
Okay, so why don't we, was 10 minutes long enough, or 15, or would you like the 15?
15.
Okay, shall we stand adjourned for 15 minutes and we'll come back to you?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, just 15 minutes has just passed. Ms. Carter, do you need a bit more time? See you on the cell phone there.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. You okay? All good to go?
Yeah, sure. So, so what we'll do is I'll just provide a bit of a summary of my evidence and just respond to a couple of the questions that you asked before.
Thank you.
And then Richard will also read out his submission.
Thank you.
So the submission that I prepared on behalf of the parks, that was circulated, and so you should have been able to have a read of that. And I've also circulated evidence,
Yes.
so I'll take that as read as well.
Yes, unless you want to, do a summary like the others, or just totally in your hands.
I guess the only summary I'd turn to is probably on the front page of the submission that was circulated. Just going back to the key reasons for the opposition to the current design of the dwelling. And so that's the reasons for submission, was that the recession plane breach is significant and will adversely affect One Boundary Street. The garage is located in the road setback and is on the site's southern boundary, and it adds to the bulk of the building and increases adverse effects on the adjacent site and on the street frontage. The rule breaches require the assessment of the design against the Arrowtown design guidelines. And the building design is, in my opinion, inconsistent with Arrowtown design guidelines, and it is inconsistent with Arrowtown's historic character. The recession plane breach and location of the garage and its design will result in adverse visual immunity effects when viewed from the street. While reference has been made to the permitted baseline in the existing environment, no clear comparison has still been provided. So it is difficult to determine and compare the level of effects from a permitted building. And in that, I mean, how far from the boundary would a 7 metre high building have to be in order to comply with the recession planes? The applicant has provided a comparison of shading. However, the effects from a recession plane breach are more than just shading. It's also privacy and dominance effects. While the proposal is a restricted discretionary activity, and the matters of discretion include the consideration of the Arrowtown design guidelines, there are a comprehensive set of guidelines for the development, and as stated above, the proposal is not consistent with the key design elements or the intent of those guidelines. So just moving on to this query of precedent effect, and I acknowledge that there are never any rules that state discretion is reserved over precedent, because precedent is not so much an effect on the environment, but it's an effect of the decision that is made. The concern here is that this is one of the first applications put under the medium density zone rules. And as we've discussed, there's a bit of a discrepancy between that new set of provisions and the Arrowtown design guidelines. What we're concerned about here is that this decision could set a bit of a new standard, I guess, for future applications, whereby the recession plane is breached by quite a significant amount. The Arrowtown design guidelines are then brought into consideration. It's acknowledged that they're not complied with or they're not met, those key design elements aren't met, but the application is approved anyway. And that's what the precedent is that we're concerned about. So if you have like for like applications into the future, an application that's similar to this one would potentially be considered in a similar vein to this one. So it's not, and it's not a legal precedent, but it is a practical precedent. And I guess just on that note, there are bound to be similar applications into the future. The other issue with that sort of consideration is that submitters, such as the Parks family, when confronted with such decisions into the future, well, if this decision is to approve the application, when they're confronted with similar applications into the future, then they may very well say, no, I won't submit an opposition because there's just no point. Because even though there's a recession plane breach, and even though that breach isn't, well, the design isn't in accordance with the design guidelines, there's just no point. So we'll just let it go. Just in terms of the garage, comment was made about the sort of seemed to be that part of the garage is in accordance with that resource consent and part of it isn't. I'd just like to note that that garage did need resource consent and the garage wasn't built in accordance with that resource consent. So that existing garage that sits there isn't lawful. I also just note too that it's up to the Commissioner as to whether you consider the permitted baseline and existing environment as relevant. Then just moving on to the comment about the monolithic wall, and the comment, I heard a comment that now that there's a commitment to the two different materials that removes that issue of it being a monolithic wall. Just to clarify that in my submission and evidence, I was referring to a monolithic wall with that two different sets of colours and materials. And if you go to, I think it's page 40 of the applicant's evidence, where it's been coloured up, that is what I was considering. And I do still believe that that is a monolithic wall. And just finally, I'd just like to refer back to the medium density zone rules and objectives, policies and purpose. And I just note that Ms. Barnett did refer to the sentence in that purpose that where it refers to two-storey buildings. I just want to reference the sentence that goes before that. It states, while providing for a higher density of development than is anticipated in a lower density suburban residential zone, the zone incorporates development controls to ensure that the reasonable maintenance of amenity values is maintained. And then it goes on to state building height will generally be 2 stories. So I just think it's really important to recognise that the zone does enable higher density, but it does so whilst also ensuring that amenity values are maintained. And just on that, I think I do agree that there is discrepancy between the guidelines and the medium density zone rules. But I think what's important here is that the medium density zone rules give us an envelope within which to design. And if you design within that envelope, then you don't need a resource consent and you don't need to consider it against the guidelines. My understanding would be that the council has developed those rules as a way of ensuring that a certain level of amenity is maintained. If you go beyond those rules, then the assumption is you're not maintaining that amenity and therefore you need to get considered against the guidelines. So I think that this makes it very important that when you do design outside of the permitted envelope, you are going to have an effect on amenity more than what was assumed under the permitted baseline. And therefore, you do need to take into account the objectives policies and the Arrowtown design guidelines.
So just on that point, your view would be that, I'm trying to think of the right word, is that, as you say, the zone provides the bulk of massing controls, and if you don't meet them, then the implications of, let's use the word implications, is then you have to come back to potentially a lesser standard, if you like, that's covered in terms of outcome in terms of the design guidelines.
A lesser standard?
Well, as in you have to comply, instead of having the same bulk of massing, you have a different types of set of controls that you have to comply with. And so it's incentivizing people to comply with the underlying bulk and massing controls of the zone. Is that what, if I understand?
That's right.
Yeah, okay, I understand you correctly. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. I was actually finished.
Okay, that's all good. I'm interested, you're quite an experienced planner and been in the district for a great many years, and I mean that in the nice possible way and such like. I honestly mean that. Do you know why this potential, it seems to be through the phase, did this come out through the phasing process or something like that in the plan review process? Yeah,
my understanding is that it was part of the council's need to increase housing supply. And so, I mean, and I wasn't actually involved in those hearings for the district plan review, so sorry, I don't know the ins and outs of it.
If you're not involved, don't worry. I'm really, again, also giving you a level of experience in the district. I'm interested in your view of the street scene as we go along, and whether you think that's coherent street scene, especially as you go down Devon Street. Your views on that?
Yeah, I think there's always been the opinion with Arrowtown that the historic management zone has been well managed, and it's different and important to retain the small build form, the large trees, the narrow roads, and informal verges. And there was always the concern that the low density zone beyond that historic management zone was developed more similarly to other suburban areas. With a wider street, so Devon Street is wider, and there are more garages located up to the boundary, and there are larger dwellings that are enabled. But I think what has changed, and I did write about this in the submission and in my evidence, is that the medium density zone does increase the bulk of the built form that can occur, but I think that's why it needs to be considered so carefully when there are breaches, because that streetscape that we see now has occurred under the low density zone and has occurred when garages were a controlled activity within the road setback. I think what the medium density zone is now trying to do is say, no, we do want more active street frontages. We do want garages set further from the boundary. And we do, so we're allowing the houses to come further forward and the garages set back further. We're still wanting to retain the sense of openness with landscaping and things, but whilst enabling like two-story dwellings, I guess. So yeah, I think the streetscape is sort of a mixed environment, but I do think that it has benefited over the years of that lower building coverage and smaller scale buildings.
Thank you. Again, I haven't come, as you know, I'm not coming to any view, but would your client be willing to enter into some sort of discussion with the applicant over potential landscaping plan?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So again, just for the benefit of everyone out, for this means I haven't come to a view. It's just, again, I keep saying this, it is standard practice for us to lose, and this guy knows this quite well. Maybe that's something we could think about in the right of reply, potentially something that could come through again without predetermining the position. No, I think the rest is really quite clear in what you're saying. Just checking, going through everything to make sure we haven't covered off. We've covered off everything I was going to ask you. I understand your arguments quite well. Thank you very much. Do we want? Who would like to speak next? Is it Mr. Parks or?
Yes. Yeah.
Over to you, Mr. Parks. You there?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly fine, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. So, as mentioned earlier, my name is Richard Parks, and I'm attending this hearing today as a representative of the Parks family who own the property at 1 Boundary Road. My family are Otago people, and in particular on my mother's side have lived in Dunedin and holidayed in central Otago since the 1950s. In the 1960s and 70s, my family holidayed in Arrowtown and regularly camped at the Arrowtown camping ground until they were fortunate enough to purchase our holiday house at 1 Boundary Road in 1978. Over the past 44 years, we've holidayed and worked in Arrowtown and have had huge enjoyment in relation to our holiday house without interruption. We have never rented it out to third parties. Our holiday house has only ever been for the sole enjoyment of our family. The first we heard about possible redevelopment of 7 Devon Street was in early 2021 last year, when we heard a rumour that a 2-storied house might be built. Of course, this was a worrying time to our family, as any 2-storied building on this property was always going to impact on the northern boundary of our section, which is the predominant boundary which provides our all-day sun and views of the surrounding hills and in particular Brow Peak. We've always joked in our family that while we do not have the magical views of, say, a Lake Hayes or a Lake Wakatipu, we do have the wonderful views of the surrounding hills of Arrowtown. It is important to make this point because the entire visual enjoyment we obtain from our house is derived from the entire length of the northern boundary of our section, and which is now the subject of our opposition at this hearing. After hearing about the worrying rumour of building development next door, my brother Michael had an opportunity one day in January last year to chat about the development with the applicant's sister, Chris. Chris's response at the time was that it was nothing to do with her, but yes, there was a plan to build a two-storied house. Chris mentioned that it was entirely the business of her sister and husband, and no more particulars were given. Then on 7 October last year, 2021, we received an email from the applicants advising us that they had lodged a resource consent application with the QLDC to build a new house on the section. We were informed this application was due to a recession plane breach on the northern boundary of our property. They advised that the QLDC had deemed that as we would be potentially affected by the proposal, that we would be an affected party. On this basis, and to assist them to progress the resource application, they requested that we sign an affected person's approval form. On receiving this worrying email with accompanying architectural plans, we asked when they needed the form signed. Their response was that it would be good if we could return the form to them by the following week. We felt this was fairly unfair time frame in which to properly assess the situation, especially where the applicants are aware this is a holiday house and that no one lives there permanently. After carefully reviewing the plans, it didn't take long for our family to determine that the recession plane breaches were, in our opinion, significant indeed. In order to properly assess the situation, however, we advised the applicants that we would need to meet on site to review the situation. And the earliest we would be able to practically organise such a meeting would be in 3 weeks' time, Labour weekend, 24th of October. We also advised it would be helpful if their architect and planner could attend the meeting, and this was arranged along with the applicant's sister, Chris. The meeting was duly convened on Labour weekend last year, and discussions were primarily centred on two issues. That after initial surveying of the site by the applicants, it transpired that the fence line, particularly at the northwestern boundary, was in the incorrect place, and that the actual boundary was inside our property by over 1 metre at the worst place. This was a major worry to us, as this could mean that many of the established trees that we had always thought were inside our boundary might be inside the neighbour's new boundary and therefore at risk of being cut down. The second matter was discussion around the garage setback, the design of the roof line, and the breach of the recession planes along the entire length of the proposed house. We specifically spoke to Murray Bennett about whether there might be any chance for the applicants to redesign the roof line so that it would not breach the recession plane, or at least minimise the effect as much as possible. We suggested potential solutions such as a lower pitched roof, or the roof line slanting away from our boundary, or perhaps building the house further inside their boundary. Murray appeared open to the possibilities and said he would discuss the issue with the applicants. Chris, however, made it quite clear to us at that meeting that she didn't expect there would be any chance of the applicants making any design changes. Chris's view in the end proved correct after we received Alex Dunn's post-meeting email confirming that no design changes would be considered. We had made it quite clear at the meeting to Murray, Alex and Chris that we were not happy with the breaches of the recession planes and the garage setback rules. We'd also considered that the contingent of Murray, Alex and Chris were the representatives of the applicants and that our communications were to be largely with them. We had politely considered all aspects of the proposal, at considerable expense engaged a planning consultant to assist us, and all travelled significant distances to attend the meeting while foregoing our usual family enjoyment of Labour weekend. We raised concerns requested changes, and all requests were rejected. Our decision to oppose the application was not entered into lightly. We have no desire to be at odds with our neighbours, and we are not a combative family. Our family is very distressed at finding itself having had to be drawn into this very upsetting property dispute. My mother is 80 years old and spends a great deal of time in Arrowtown because she loves the property so much and because it has so many happy memories, especially after our father died in 2020. And weighing up whether we would oppose the application, we considered at length what our father might have thought. Overwhelmingly, we agreed that he would have been very unhappy at the way this whole matter has evolved, and especially the fact that if the QLDC had not deemed us to be an affected person, then the applicants would have simply gone ahead with this house design, despite it having significantly breached the recession plane and garage setback rules, and in all likelihood would have upset any reasonable neighbour being faced with such a significant building program on a sunny northern boundary. Our opposition is resulting in significant expense to our family, not to mention an extraordinary time commitment. We are committed to this opposition, however, because we absolutely love our holiday house and the character and historic charm of Arrowtown, and believes that the applicants are wrong in 3 respects. First, the application is technically wrong. The breach of the recession planes along the entire length of the house and at its worst place, 1.6 metres, is a breach of the QLDC planning rules. The recession plane rules are there for a reason, and are specifically designed to protect homeowners like us where the breaches are occurring along a boundary line that receives the all-day sun and daylight. This is not a case where the breach of the permitted baseline rules is occurring to a part of our property where such a breach is not all that important, e.g. where generally we have no interest or view. Nor is this a minor breach of a few centimetres, which some might consider minor. This is a breach of 1.6 metres at its worst place, and the breach exists along the entire length of the building. In our view, this is wrong. It is wrong to have rules that are designed to protect homeowners in such a beautiful town as Arrowtown, and then people being allowed to simply breach those rules. It is a mystery to us that any property owner in this historic part of Arrowtown can be aware of the special Arrowtown building rules and then think it perfectly acceptable to simply go ahead and breach them, especially where the breach is as extensive as it is here and will clearly impact on the neighbouring property owner, being us. 2, this application is wrong in relation to our enjoyment and the market value of our property. Despite the applicant's submissions, the effect of the recession plane breaches and garage setback rules are going to adversely affect the enjoyment of our property, primarily due to the height and increased bulk of the new building. We will lose sunlight and daylight, and in particular during those middle 6 months of the year when the sun is lower in the sky. The increased bulk is also going to affect our views, which are very important to us, as previously stated. In addition, there is every likelihood we may develop the property, and this will affect any new dwellings that may be built closer to our northern boundary, and consequently will affect the enjoyment and market value of our overall property. It seems very odd to us that a suggested mitigating factor might be that it is acceptable to breach the recession plane rules simply because our existing old crib-style house is currently sitting in a location at a reasonable distance from the northern boundary. This is likely to change in the future, and therefore this thinking should not be given any serious consideration in weighing up a decision. We also think it's very odd that the applicant is relying on the vegetation on our side of the boundary to mitigate the effects of their non-compliant building design. Nothing has been provided to us or suggested to us to enable any mitigation of those effects today. 3, this application is wrong for Arrowtown. Whether we like it or not, any decision on this application is going to set a precedent, legal or otherwise. A lot of architects, planners and homeowners will likely be awaiting the outcome of what could be a very important case now and in the future, especially given that we're working within the new proposed planning rules and that Arrowtown is currently undergoing significant periods of development because of its popularity in New Zealand. Arrowtown is a very special place. We have the QLDC planning rules and accompanying Arrowtown design guidelines to protect the visual qualities of such a very special historic town. It is vital to the future of Arrowtown that landowners remain respectful towards the rules and regulations that relate to building in Arrowtown. Otherwise, where does it end? How much is too much? Every decision to allow any breach of such rules as recession plans or garage setback rules, no matter how small, is just another potential nail in the coffin for the erosion of the specialness of Arrowtown. If a decision is made to allow breaches of recession plans and garage setback rules as extensive as in this case, then what about the next case where the envelope may be pushed even further? Where any future house design results in similar breaches of such rules as the recession plans or the garage setback rules, then such property owners and their architects will be very carefully considering this decision and weighing up their chances of breaching such rules for their own personal benefit. Equally, property owners who may be affected by any house designs will be watching decisions like this to consider the likelihood of being able to insist on the compliance of the rules or reduction of effects. It would be a very sad day indeed if property owners in Arrowtown simply decide not to try and justifiably insist on compliance with the rules because they are aware their chances of opposing any non-compliance are unlikely to be seriously hurt. In summary, it cannot be right for Arrowtown to embark on a relaxation of the well thought out and newly minted planning rules. We feel very strongly that it is important that Arrowtown retains its beautiful historic village charm. If it hadn't been for the very active Arrowtown Historic Society back in the 1980s and 90s, there would have been a very good chance that the developers would have come in and destroyed the look and feel of Arrowtown's historic Main Street precinct. While I appreciate this is of course not on the same level, this property is still located in the Newtown area, and it is important that very careful consideration is being given to anyone who wants to breach the rules that have been prescribed for building in this historic area. Any decision for or against this application is likely to have far-reaching consequences for the future of the character and historic charm of Arrowtown, and in particular the older parts of Arrowtown. The new proposed house will also be a tough intrusion for us in relation to the full enjoyment of our property. Finally, in our opinion, it is just simply inappropriate for such a large house to be built on a section of this small size, and it is just not consistent with the proposed planning rules and the Arrowtown design guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parks. Very, very appreciative. Are you able to take a few questions from myself?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for the history. So it's been a family, if I understand you correctly, this has been a family home for you, as you say, over 44, a family holiday home, I should say, for over 44 years. And you have a long association with the district, obviously with the camping ground before that. Have you, I mean, obviously the area has changed significantly in that period of time. Arrowtown's changed significantly with the level of development that's taken place in the last 44 years, I'd imagine.
Yes, it has.
Because I'd imagine going back 44 years, and again, I don't know, I'm asking you, that most of the development I see at the fringes, I know some of the newer stuff, wouldn't have been there. You would have been near the edge of the town, I'd imagine, back in 44 years ago.
Looking at some of the historic photographs, the Arrowtown boundary was fairly much on Boundary Road where we are now. So we were just inside the boundary in the 1950s. And Arrowtown fairly much had a ring around it at that point, and then would have started to expand further in the 70s and 80s.
Okay, you can see that definitely by the housing, the type of housing that's gone through around you. I totally take your point, and your point about just because your house is not there and it's towards the one side of the property doesn't mean it doesn't impact on the other side of the property. I totally take that point because it's your development potential. I'm totally conscious of that as well. Just in terms of, we were talking, and I'll come back to Ms. Carter because I do want to ask her this question as well. I forgot to ask her this. With the landscaping, sometimes landscaping the cure can be worse than the disease, if you know what I'm trying to say. You know, people can put in leyland cypresses and before you know they're 25 metres high and take out all their sun. If you think went along those lines, are you quite, you know, you've planted those trees, it seems to me, if I'm correct, and the boundary was undefined and now it's been defined and some of those trees now sit on the applicant side opposed to your side. I imagine your family's planted them. Are those the sort of things that you would like to see retained? Or is it different types of landscaping you would want on that boundary? Again, I'm not coming to any view, I'm just trying to work my way through what you would do as a landowner, what you feel as, you know, as your family home.
The existing trees on the property were planted before we took ownership of the property.
Right.
They've always been there. The entire property is fairly much remains in the same state, more or less, that it was in at the time that we bought it in 1978. In terms of future vegetation, it's a difficult one because first and foremost, we would just prefer not to have a house of that size and bulk next to us. But if, of course, a decision was made that to proceed in favour of it, then the next best thing for us would be to have some sort of vegetation shading to block out, or at least to better articulate the
break up the bulk and mass of the building that you're looking at.
That's right. But we haven't seen anything to that effect.
But I'm also cognizant, again, not coming to any view, that if we do so, I don't want something that go in there that takes out the sun. Like I said, the leyland cypress comes through and before you know, a few years' time, all your sun's gone, especially in the winter, which is the last thing you'd probably want as an outcome as well. So it'd have to be carefully thought through actually what went in there.
Also, I'm not sure how practical the idea of vegetation is in many respects, because the building is going to be so tall on that boundary, then what size vegetation are you talking about? And what sort?
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your time today, and I really appreciate everything you put in context. Thank you very much. Ms. Carr, just coming back to the issue about landscaping again, I haven't come to any of you. I'm just trying to, as you know, work through these details if we did get there. I am cognizant that there would have to be some serious thought going into this, because I don't, you know, as I said, the cure can sometimes be worse than the disease with these things. And I don't mean in the bad way, just the species choice would have to be very, very well thought through, I'd imagine. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess one of my concerns with landscaping is that we have to recognise that landscaping on the applicant's side is probably only possible along the black part of the dwelling. It can't fit into the site alongside the garage, which is it 7.5 long, or no, 7 metres long along that boundary. And I'm not sure whether they could actually fit landscaping in to the east of the garage either, where the biggest recession plane breach is located, because my understanding is that's a set of steps that goes down to the lower level of the site. So if we're talking about landscaping and being able to mitigate, it could actually only go alongside the black part of the proposed dwelling. And I take your point too, and I agree that it is a double-edged sword, because if you provide landscaping to mitigate the effects, then you've got potential for more shading. One of the considerations, though, is that, and as Mr. Parks said, is that landscaping to soften that view is still probably better than looking at the black wall. And one of the other concerns raised is just that it's not just the windows don't just cause a privacy effect, they also have an effect on night sky enjoyment, because you've got light shining through those windows. And so if you have some landscaping that can reduce that effect, that will assist. And I guess the issue is, though, that those windows are very high and closer to the boundary than what would be anticipated by the rules, because they've reached the recession plane.
And I totally take your point, and Mr. Parks pointed out the dominance issue. It's just not, you know, it's just not it's a dominance. I totally take that. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else, Ms. Parks, anything you would like to raise with us? With me? I'm so used to being with others, so I don't mean any egotistical way of asking. I'm just used to being with more than one commissioner, so I mean me. Anything more you'd like to raise? Anything you want to raise, Mary?
No, I think everything's been covered. Thank you very much.
Anything else, Jean and Scully, you would like to raise?
No, I think that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Really appreciate everyone's time and effort they've gone into the submissions and your evidence as well. Thank you. I'll pass over to the council. Are you guys ready to go, or do you want a 5-minute break as well? Over to you, Ms. Beck.
Can we have a 5-minute break, please?
Sure. So it's so why don't we come back at 5 to 12 to give you about 7 or 8 minutes? How about that? So we stand adjourned until 5 to 12. Thank you. All right, Ms. Becker, you are ready to go?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. So you think you'd like to, first of all, before we come to your report, your 42-hour report, thank you very much for that. Is there anything you'd like to respond to that you've heard during the course of the hearing before I come to questions?
Well, I stand by my report even after listening today, but I do just have a couple of things, I guess. Firstly, in regard to your query, Lee, on whether the Arrowtown design guidelines fell under 1041B or C, I think that it falls within 1041B. The section 32 for the medium density residential zone does make specific reference to include the Arrowtown design guidelines give some weight to these guidelines. So it's my opinion that they fall under 1041B6 clause 6. And also there's a policy within the medium density residential zone that makes reference to consistency with the design guidelines, and there's also this was included in the matters of discretion as well. So that was that matter. And then I also just had a query on the effectiveness of that mitigation planting along the common boundary, and how realistic it is for that to be maintained and established, given there's only a 20 centimetre offset of the garage from that boundary. But also, and then also just happy to be involved in any discussions about conditions in that regard, for landscaping or any other conditions between the applicant and the submitters.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really, and I think as Ms. Carter raised, it's an interesting question, and I think as we come to the end, something I raised with Barnett about that, and maybe something to think about how roads apply. Thank you for your report, as I said. Thank you for those comments. I'm interested in your feeling, as I've asked the other planners. Firstly, and maybe Mr. Woodhouse could assist about how this, was Ms. Carter's analysis sort of, is that how the council officers would see this approach? And Ms. Beck and Mr. Woodhouse, you can answer this. Is it sort of things that you've seen, what she was saying, if I understood correctly, was the new zone comes through, if you like the better uses of words, gives a bulk and massing, sets out those parameters. If you don't meet that, then you're then fall into that sort of position whether you are now considered against the guidelines, which have a different set of outcomes associated with them. Is that how, it's almost like sort of almost implies like a step-through process in a way. Is that how the council sees this? Or am I misunderstanding how?
I think just generally read in conjunction with, obviously we've got the medium density zoning guideline controls, but obviously the Arrowtown design guidelines are they're specific to Arrowtown, and they do seek to achieve you know, the certain character and amenity and design criteria are maintained or, you know, achieved within the respective zonings. So that they do, I wouldn't say it would be a sort of a step process, but it's certainly it has to be factored into any assessment that you make. Yeah.
I suppose that leads to the question, you know, is the general and the specific, isn't it, in a way? You've got the generalised zone that goes across the whole district, and you've got something specific that sits on the top of it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ms. Beck, I'm interested in your view, and I asked the other planners this about the coherence of the street scene and or streetscape, however you want to say it, and your feelings of the consistency in that street scene.
I think that Devon Street is a bit of an interesting street in Arrowtown, with the very wide. It does have a different feel to, I think, some of the other streets within Arrowtown, especially those heading towards the township itself. And it is a streetscape that has been shaped by the presence of those garages at the intersection near Centennial Street. I mean, my street's right. And I don't think that Devon Street at this time has a particularly cohesive character, particularly along the length that the site is, sort of between Ford Street and Thames Street to the south.
Thank you. Just going to the actual specifics in your report. just coming into under the proposed district plan, there's no number, proposed district plan, and you go down to, your analysis of the proposed district plan, especially in the medium density residential section.
Yeah.
And so that's page 16 of your report.
Yeah.
And it goes down, third last paragraph. I consider the proposal is generally consistent with the policies of the new list stocks. What do you mean by generally? Is it, I'm trying to get what you mean by generally consistent. Is it the flavour of, or, so they're not actually inconsistent, they're not consistent with it per se, is it? I'm just trying to understand what you mean by generally.
I think it has to be acknowledged that not all of the particularities of the guidelines have been incorporated into the design. However, I think that there is enough so with consideration of those design guidelines being part of the objectives and policies for the medium density residential zone. But I think on balance, when looking at the objectives and policies as a whole and the Arrowtown design guidelines as a whole, I think it is generally consistent. I guess for it to be strictly, very closely aligned, like more, if it were to be more closely aligned, I think there would be a little bit more recourse to the outcome sought by the ADG. But I don't think that what we have is completely inconsistent with the ADG.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to the garage, and I don't know, Ms. Woodhouse, if you could answer this question. Has there been any enforcement action ever taken against the garage not being in the right place?
Not that I'm aware of, but I didn't check with monitoring.
Yeah, I just wonder, has anyone complained? Because I take Ms. Carter's point that technically it's not in the right place and doesn't form part of the existing environment. She raises a really good point there. I just wondered if anyone ever complained about it being in the wrong place, if you knew anyone complaints that ever been received. Not that it's a major, I just wondered if anyone had.
I don't think we never came across anything on the file.
No, unaware of that.
Okay, thank you. No, the rest is pretty straightforward. I don't mean in a bad way. I just mean I understand everything that you're saying to me, and I understand your view on this application, and I understand that in light of everything that you've heard today, it hasn't changed your view on the application at all. Spec, I understand that as well. I think pretty much the issues about engineering and traffic, I don't think that was really in dispute, really in the place. I don't think we need to talk to the engineer about that. So that's all good. Anything else you'd like to bring to my attention before I come to Ms. Barnett again?
At this stage, there's nothing else that I want to add.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the report, your 42-hour report and everything like that. Thank you. Coming to you, Ms. Barnett, really in your hands, but I wonder, as you probably know, as usual practice, from sort of, not that this is not important or anything like that, that's not what I'm saying, but the more larger scale hearings, we usually set down timetables for provisions of rights of reply and such like. We could do that, and I wondered if we did do that, but I'm in your hands, whether there is an opportunity for you to think and have some discussions with the parties about, again, without coming to a view, on this landscaping issue. What's your feelings on that?
Yeah, we had thought about that and whether we needed to do a right of reply. I'm not sure if we need to do something that's too detailed, but I think we feel that most of it's set out in the evidence in the discussion today, but we're very happy to talk to the other parties about the landscaping and maybe narrow down what that might look like, specimens, things like that, if that would be of assistance. And
I don't want to hold the process up, because I'm very conscious about everyone's duty under the Act to process as fast as appropriately. Ms. Carter, how long would that be for you and your client to engage in that? And again, I'm just throwing numbers out here. Is 10 working days long enough to do that for you? Because normally it would be 5 working days, but I'm just cognizant that, as Mr. Park says, everyone is, doing it in their own time, especially from the submitter's point of view. Would 10 be enough? Before I go back to Mr. Barnett and Ms. Barnett to see if she's happy with that.
So sorry, the question is this to enable?
Yeah,
sorry?
so if we said, and again, I'm just throwing this out there, we gave Ms. Barnett 10 working days to do her right of reply, and in that period there could be discussions between you, the council, and Ms. Barnett's crew about a potential idea of a landscaping plan. Would that be enough time to actively and meaningfully engage with you and your client?
Yes, I think so.
Ms. Barnett, would that be too long for you if we went with that?
10 days is fine, Commissioner.
Ms. Beck and Mr. Woodhouse, is 10 days okay for you? I don't want to put anyone in any difficulties here. I'm also, conscious about times. Would that be okay for you guys?
Yes, that's fine with us, thank you.
Okay, so why don't we say, and if agreement can't be reached, that's fine, and we just, agreement can't be reached, and we can just have maybe a memorandum explaining why agreement can't be reached. So today's the 22nd, which is a very auspicious day, and the 22nd, the 22nd of the second two, isn't it all twos in a row or something? So that would be, what would be? That would be, was it the 2nd of, you've got your calendar out there, Ms. Beck, my cell phone's off. What day are we talking for 10 working days? Is that the 2nd? Will be longer than that, wouldn't it?
Sorry, I've got the 8th as
the 8th. All right, so why don't we say the 8th of March, right of reply, and as part of the right of reply, Ms. Barnett, a discussion about whether anything in agreement could be reached, and again, without prejudice of the decision, but with Ms. Carter and Parks and such like, and the council about a potential landscaping plan. Does that sound acceptable to everyone?
That sounds acceptable to us.
Jenny, is that okay to you? Yep, okay, that's okay to the council. So why don't we say, I don't think I need to do a minute. I think, it's because this is all recorded. I think we all know it's a small discrete hearing, so I think we all know where we stand. So why don't we say on the 8th by 2 p.m, something's sent through to the lovely Ms. Anderson, Trish, so she can circulate that to all the parties, and we go from there. So we'll do that. So 2 p.m, 8th of March, circulate the right of reply and where we've got to on this potential landscaping plan to Ms. Anderson to circulate to all the parties, at which point I will determine whether we've got sufficient information. Normally I'd say I confer with my colleagues, but there's no colleagues to confer with, it's just myself. I pretty much think it'll be okay from here. And then if that's the case, I'll let Ms. Anderson know so that you all know, and then I have 15 working days as according to the Act to make a decision on this. Is there any questions anyone would like to ask before I adjourn the hearing? All right. Thank you very much. It's been very, very, very good to unfortunately not see you all face to face, but it's very good to see you on Zoom. Thank you very much for the submitters, the parks and such like, for coming in and making your submissions. Thank you to the council officers for your time and reports, and thank you to the applicant. I think this hearing has been held in a very professional and very appropriate way. We stand adjourned until that time in March, when we'll get the stuff to Ms. Anderson, and then I'll come back and we'll go from there. So thank you very much for all your time. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, everyone.